Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kish.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
So, it's one of those really crazy things. Every day I wake up and every day it's 6:15 and every day the sun comes up. And I don't know, what does it feel like, Marcus? Oh, I know. It feels like Groundhog Day. Because it is. It's Groundhog Day.
No, it feels like the sun's not coming up here. It's continuously grey. That's my Groundhog Day. It's grey and cold in London.
Okay, so what you're trying to tell me, Marcus, is that you're doubting whether or not I'm really having a Groundhog Day, right?
Yeah, the surprising gift of yet another grey guy.
All right. Enough of our kind of bad humor, or at least my bad humor. Who's on the show today?
Yes, so we had a very lovely interview with Marc A. Pitman and about his book, The Surprising Gift of Doubt, leadership book. It was really, really, we had a lot of laughs on this one. And he's dialing in all the way from South Carolina, Greenville, and I think he's very smart and very entertaining. Got some great stories. It was a really great interview. What were your takeaways?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to email him and ask him where he got his bow tie, because his bow tie is really, really cool.
Is that
I know on
very
the
South
podcast,
Carolina, the bow tie?
yeah, you can't see the bow tie if you're listening on the podcast, but on the YouTube channel, you'll see that he's got an amazing tie. My takeaways: tell yourself positive lies. I am one of those sales guys that absolutely hates doing sales cold calls. They're going to be busy, and they're going to shout at me and all these other things, which are totally made up lies. I could tell myself, this is a great opportunity. They're going to be waiting for my call. They've got exactly my problem. Both of them are lies. Tell yourself positive lies. And I thought that was a really good one. And I was giving a bit of an explanation about some of my previous work experience. And I kind of told people, there might be a few dead bodies on the side of the road. And he says, well, what is your job? Because if you're a hitman, I'm going to tell you to keep doing what you've been doing. I'm like, okay, right. So always kind of ask her exactly what are your objectives, whether they're leaders or whether they're clients. But those are my takeaways. What about you?
So I really liked the way he was talking about stories, because comms or stories, having a story as a leader, having a story when you do change and transformation, or just generally as a team. I really love this idea because I found it in my work when I see it, when it actually, someone does it, it just works. It's amazingly important. It's amazingly effective. So figure out what your story is, as a leader, what your story is for the organization and so on. Because people want to be there for a story, for a purpose and so on. Good brands have a great story. Sometimes it's the origin story. Sometimes it's what they do. And it feels a bit over the last 2 years. Some of these things have been falling by the wayside a bit because everyone's got confused and lots of pressure. And, I think a lot of people might have forgotten a bit why they're where they are because everything's just kept homing in on us and everything seems to change. But I think we're still there for the same reasons. And maybe we want to remind ourselves of that. So I really liked the story aspect of it. And I think one thought I had while we were talking that it didn't voice was I think I'd like to think of products and services as well about as a story. It's sort of a mission, a problem to be solved. And, there's a reason why teams come together and try to do something. And I wonder if within a team circle and a product or service, you can actually evolve a bit more the story idea because it feels like a really good thing and an anchor as well. You know what it is and what it isn't because the story is straightforward, but it might be explored, it might grow, might evolve, just like TV series do. It's a great thing. So I think the story aspect I really like because I find it very important in organizations.
Great. Well, let's go talk to Marc and have some laughs.
Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code WICKED-PODCAST. I repeat, WICKED-PODCAST for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Marc A. Pitman. Hello, Mark, and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's wicked fun to be here.
So, as usual, we start from the top, and thank you for that. Please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
I'm Mark Pittman. I'm an executive coach who helps leaders with different stages of their growth and development. And the book was written because I couldn't explain to my friends what I did for a living or my parents. They'd say, "So what do you do?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm an executive coach." And they'd say, "Oh, okay." And then they'd get this quizzical look on their face and they'd look back at me and say, "So, no, really, what do you do?" Uh, so it took years of trying to figure out how do I explain what coaching is, because coaching isn't mentoring. It's not that I don't have to have gone where the person's been before to help them from my own autobiography. That's not what I have to do. I don't have to be an expert necessarily in their field to be an effective coach. Um, and I'm not a consultant. I'm not coming in with a here are the 6 steps to greatness, or here are the 6 steps to transformation. It's not a linear process. It's about a lot of listening, and as you probably know, listening and asking questions, and that doesn't fit a lot of our paradigms in the West. So fortunately, it took a while and a couple of really skilled editors to help me describe what I do in a way that sounds like me.
But
Yeah,
you also tell in the opening that you started off with like a blog post or an article that turned into kind of a world tour of speaking engagements.
Yes. Yeah, it was one of the attempts of trying to do this was I was just trying to figure out what do I do? And I worked with a friend named Neen James who does contextual models. And so I figured out this model for the types of tools I use with clients, but I realized that's too localized. Where are people on the journey when they come to this point? And yeah, that first draft of a blog post led to keynotes and on called The Surprising Gift of Doubt and immersion days where I bring people here to Greenville, South Carolina, and hold the space for them to actually do some of the exercises, because a lot of us don't have the time or take the time to do the exercises to work on ourselves. And that's yes, all that led into the book itself, which is thanks for noticing that.
lovely. And let's start with the first question on. So, I think early in the book you talk about sort of the levels, the sources of stress that leaders have, and I think in particular there was one that says the source of stress are the customers. And I'm quite curious about that because my background is in service design, design thinking, very customer centric, and I always see leaders very far removed from customers. How can they get stressed by
Well,
customers?
have you had customers? I'm just kidding. They
Very
ask the same
few.
questions. Oh, okay. Then that's probably not as stressful. It was in the context of, I believe it was the Center for Creative Leadership did a survey to try to find the one stressor that leaders had. And so customers were one of the four. It was bosses, peers, employees, and customers. So there's a sort of drawn and quartered feeling that leaders say they're experiencing. Um, I would say probably from the customer part of it. I didn't get into the reasons for customers, but it's probably because customers either ask the same questions because they're all starting at similar points, but you can often feel like you're parroting the same question over and over. Just at the time of this recording, we're in a startup for a class, and my colleague is so good at answering the question respectfully. They're in it. We have a WhatsApp group, and all the participants are asking the same questions that he's already explained 3 times in cut and paste forms. Um, and he's got this on in text a wonderful presence. Back channel, we are both like pulling out our hair. Are they not reading this stuff? Why can they not see? Do they not know how WhatsApp works? And they do. They're the ones that taught me. It's taken 4 years of working with this group for me to do WhatsApp. Um, so I think and it's probably the differences in people too. We all see the world differently. We process differently. And so having to learn to speak the dialect of the customer is something that a lot of people don't like to do. I don't know if this is similar to where you are, but in the United States, nonprofit organizations and donors have this issue too. Nonprofits just want donors to understand what they do and don't want to bother figuring out to how to speak to donors in a way that's compelling or interesting. They feel like they have a moral right, and I've seen shopkeepers and others do that too. My job is to sell you stuff. It's not to figure out how to explain it to you. And those people don't usually stick around that long in business.
So I've got two things on that. I was literally laughing on my side over here because you were talking about students and you just keep saying the same thing, you and your colleague, over and over and over again. I am stuck in meetings that last 2 to 3 hours with a cast of 20 to 25, with a top five consultancy spending hundreds of euros per hour per person. And I'm doing what I call the dance of the three knives. It's legal, it's regulatory, and tax. And the three knives are said to kill all good startup ideas. But if you can survive a sustained attack from the three knives and do the dance of the three knives, then your startup will indeed proceed. But the number of times I've told that over and over and over again, but it doesn't fit their model. I'm doing something in blockchain. I'm doing something decentralized. I'm doing something different, and they just don't want to hear it. But
That well,
that
that
leads me on. Go on.
that was one of my biggest problems in coaching. Was my first round of coaching. I was working with nonprofit leaders in particular, and their biggest problem was fundraising. And I knew nonprofit NGOs, they always say, "Oh, but we're different. You don't understand. We're different." So I decided, let's just skip all the preamble and get to the "Oh, but we're different." But they
Yeah.
needed the preamble. So I would say, well, let's talk. And it wasn't until I wrote my first book, Ask Without Fear, where they felt like, okay, he's got a 4-step formula. Okay, he knows what he's talking about, and now we can get to the, oh, but we're different. We're so fancy. We have a different approach. We're different. We're unicorns. We're this and that. Yeah, it's so funny though. Everybody wanted to say they're different, but you can't necessarily accelerate that part of, okay, we understand. We know
Yeah,
you're
exactly.
totally different, just like everybody else.
Just like everybody else.
You're right.
Or Monty Python-esque. We are all individuals.
Well
But
said.
anyway, stories. I mean, whether you're an NGO or a nonprofit, the way you engage with donors, in my experience, is tell a story that they can relate to, that they can tell on the golf course, that they can tell at the pub, that they can tell in their
Oh,
book club. Tell a story. And you've got a great section in your book about stories. So tell us about stories in The Gift of Doubt.
well, and this helps also not just NGOs. It helps with companies when customers can tell the story to other customers. You get pre-qualified people coming to you. It helps in your own employment and your own hiring when you're able to tell stories of your own different things in your past that can help, that are what people are looking for. They can remember, oh, I don't remember much about that guy, but I remember she did this or he did that. So being able to cultivate our stories is important. What I found working with leaders is that it is one of the core areas for transformation is getting clear on the stories we tell ourselves. We always have self-talk going on, and um, there's I don't think, I am surprised at how much we don't appreciate how those can sabotage us, those stories. There's a couple of, I grew up in a weird family where I had homework for school and then homework for being a pitman. And so the homework for being a pitman was reading positive mental attitude books, reading goal setting books, listening to sales
Wow.
leaders and motivational speakers and Florence Littauer, Zig Ziglar, that sort of thing. So I grew up really aware of what my thinking was. My parents would never let me say, oh, we can't afford this, because that was a story we were telling ourselves about our relationship with money. And they didn't want to be controlled by money. They wanted to be in control of money. So they would always say, we're choosing not to buy this now. It could be
Oh,
because the budget
wow.
wasn't there, but it
Yeah.
wasn't. So there was always, and we got a little weird. I mean, that's weird for most people. We got even weirder. Like sometimes we went through a phase of not calling them stoplights. Here in the United States, we could say stoplights. We call them go lights. Companies will go on retreat. We tried to call them advances. We're going on an advance, and nobody knew what that was. So we went back to calling it a retreat. But the stories, there's one of the ways that my friend Jessica Sharp here in Greenville has people, and I think I mentioned in the book, has people just kind of go through a day or a week of non-judgmentally just jotting down the thoughts that they're saying to themselves. What's your self-talk? What's going on in your head? Just put it down on a A4 piece of paper or something. And then at the end of that time, look at it and just ask yourself, read through all the things that you say to yourself and the different tone of voice that you're speaking to yourself, and then ask yourself, would you talk to a friend that way?
Mm.
Yeah.
Most of the time, we are so toxic to ourselves. And so Jessica's invitation is, why don't you start being a friend to yourself too?
Mm.
I'm really, and I think it's in part because more and more research goes into this over the decades that we are storytelling human beings. Our phone may have an Android app operating system or BlackBerry or iOS. Humans have a story operating system. And when we log
Yes.
something in with story, and when we're trying to memorize facts or do mathematical formula, if we have a story around it, it actually lodges in us better, and we're able to retain the information more accurately.
Have you ever read the Four Agreements?
No.
So the four agreements are four different agreements, but one of them is to be impeccable with your word. And that's really what they are talking about, is be very, very careful how you use language, both internal language and external language, because you can indeed manifest both things. It's a
Right?
really, really, really great book that I would recommend. The other three agreements are also quite good, but we're not going to go off on somebody else's book at the moment. I'm going to hand back over to Marcus for the next question, unless you
Well,
got something to say.
that's why, yeah, that's why there was I think I put in the book about lying to yourself, lying positively instead of lying negatively. It's that
Mhm.
impeccable agreement with words. The idea is if you're a sales professional and you're calling a prospect and you're thinking this is probably a bad time, I'm probably bugging them, they probably don't want to buy my stuff anyway. That is just as untrue as saying this could be the best time. I bet they've been waiting for my solution. I bet they can't wait to talk to me and buy my stuff. Um, both are lying to yourself. They're made up stories in your head. You don't know until you speak to the person and they tell you where they're at.
Yeah.
So I like to feed the positive by catching myself in the negative and realizing, okay, that's probably that could be very true, but it's just as true as this. And try
Mm.
to catch myself dialing when I'm feeling a little bit happier to get over my call reluctance.
No, but I think it's really great because I think there's probably a level to where I surely been sitting in big companies and listening to leadership giving us a speech, and everything was a bit hyper positive without acknowledging what's actually also we see every day, which is not so positive. But
Yeah.
generally, the language thing, and yeah, I'm not going to mention another book either, but we had David Marc A on there on intent based leadership, and he had a second book as well around language of leadership as well. We say, look, this is
Mm.
about how you describe your actions and how you describe your decisions and all of that. That actually helps create a completely different dynamic. And I think here in the show as well, we had quite a couple of times when we talked about cultures or scenarios of failure, right? And stop calling it failure. You actually always learn something, right? So
Mm.
again, turning that into a positive and eventually even into a value that a lot of companies don't recognize. So when you're starting with leadership and say, oh, this is just to stay positive or convince or move forward and see where you can get with it, this in particular is actually, when you talk about value, something that might be measured and then might be actually put a budget on, where others, it's not going to get a budget because failure shouldn't have a budget, right? So, but if you start talking about learning, then you're completely
Right.
getting into the space of actually being able to do something, not seeing it as a risk, but seeing it as an opportunity,
You could
right? So it's
definitely
just,
budget for learning. I wouldn't want to budget for failure. Yeah. Can I
yeah,
say something that can I say something that may
yes,
be a little off color language? Okay, so one organization had that I'll leave unnamed, but the VP of HR, his whole team had a dumbass award that they gave out every week, and it was
wow.
a picture of it was a statue of a person mooning. So it was
Mm,
Right.
totally irreverent and totally humorous, and everybody from the VP of HR to the directors to the frontline admin were vying for that award each week. And the criteria was, where did we screw up in pursuit of employee satisfaction? Where did
mm,
we try to serve an employee so much that we just were dumbasses? We made a really bad mistake.
wow.
That level of risk and making humor for risk made it so much safer because people didn't hide it anymore. When they messed up and they did some compensation calculation wrong or they did something else, everybody could address it quickly instead of having it be like they're trying to cover it up and hope that nobody found it.
Creative.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
didn't. They didn't put the award anywhere public. It was so funny when they finally showed me. They called me in and they're like, "Look under the desk. This is our dumbass award." So it was like a hidden thing too within their just their department and their culture. It was a
Mm,
really fun way of making risk, celebrating risk, and for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons, but kind of identifying what the right values were, and then how can we be pursuing this to the extreme.
yeah, yeah. There's one thing I want to pick up on, which is also one of my favorite things to talk about, which is the difference between generalists and specialists. And in some way, you have the quote where 75% of population are considered generalists. There's probably a wider conversation there because some friends of ours, they start talking about polymath and hybrid people, not work, and all of these things start to become different. And I think careers are now starting to be considered a bit different as well, that you might do lots of different things, and organizations try to compensate for that. So in your view, when you have leaders and people, what's your view on this whole thing of, if you have so many generalists, organizations tend to try to be specialists on things and hire people for one particular thing. But even in the book, you said actually, some leaders have particular character traits, but they can always borrow from adjacent ones. So that gets back
Well,
into a
that's where I think
generalist
it's
kind
so
of thing.
helpful to know the different structures and categories so that you can know that I can dip into, I may not be skilled or naturally aligned to be this way, but there is a choice I can have. And so in this case, it's the Highlands Ability Company. They took a bunch of corporate tests, individual corporate tests for specific abilities, and put it into one battery of tests. And it is a battery. It's about 3 hours, and it's most people finish it. My mom, when I was going through training years ago, she took it and she said, I felt more alert after 36 hours of labor with you and nothing to show for it than the 3 hour test.
Right.
And that pretty much sums up the experience that a lot of us
Yeah.
have, because you're doing seemingly stupid tasks under time pressure just to see what comes quickly. So the generalists and specialists, I think it's not which better or what's not better, but like specialists are, the idea is they're kind of like a Waldorf salad. If you put them together, they're going to stand out. They'll be the nuts and the berries and the green leaves. Whereas generalists are more of a casserole. When you put them together on a team, they blend together and move together as one whole unit. So specialists can add a special perspective when they're leading, but they need to also listen to what everybody else is saying. Similar to what we were saying about speaking the dialect, your team may have a dialect, and if you can speak into that, you might be able to get your communication across more quickly than if you keep trying to use the language that is more natural to you. Generalists, on the other hand, may need to find specialists that are able to go either deep into a topic area or put a unique spin on something. If all the companies in your area look the same, you might need some specialists that are able to show how yours is different. So there can be, I think it's about working together well, not an either or.
Hmm. So the next part of the book is kind of going into more of the detail of that particular series and suite of tests. So one of the first big promotions that I got, I was sitting with my boss on the river in Berlin, and I said, I've always gotten results. It hasn't always been pretty, but I've always gotten results. And he says, Troy, as long as you get results, I can live with a few dead bodies on the side of the road. And I said, you and I are going to get along fine. My friends have given me the nickname of the VP of GSD. I'm the vice president of getting shit done. It's not always pretty, but it always gets done. So I am indeed kind of the big glowing D. I'm the one that walks into a situation and assesses exactly who's the fucker and what's wrong
Jesus.
immediately, because they're just blatantly obvious.
So obvious to you.
Immediate. It's like painted in neon. Why doesn't anybody else see this? And on the other scale, I'm probably more kind of the protector. And I was like, just reading through these things, like, I can see all of these things, like they're jumping off the page at me. So, you wrote it beautifully because I relate to it. And I'm sure there's lots of other people that will relate to the other characteristics and the other qualities. But tell me about balancing. How do I leave fewer dead bodies on the side of the road?
Well, is your job being a hitman? I just want to make sure, begin with the end in mind. I'm a Franklin Covey trained coach. So I want to know what's your end goal. Because if that's your end goal, then keep doing what you're doing.
So your new logistics is just a metaphor you're working in, isn't it, Troy? International man of mystery.
Cleaning accounts. I understand now. Um, so the way that one of the things my twist on assessments and behavior is that I looked at hardwiring in three levels. There's the observable behavior, there's the hardwired behavior, which would be the Highlands, just what comes quickly to you and what skills you have to learn to help with others. Um, the and then there's the motivational behavior as well. And so I think part of the balancing is having an understanding of the different mix that you are. I'm a firm believer in being fully yourself. So if it's knowing, but that means also knowing your shadow side. So if it's knowing, hey, look, so in the DISC assessment, if you know DISC, extrovert, introvert, task centered, people centered, I was doing a training once and I have people move out into the different parts of the room. It's really fun. The extroverts I invite to the front because they want to be there anyway. The introverts I say go to the back because it's safer. And then I have them I talk about them. And then I have the room split up also for people and task. So I had an extrovert task centered guy say, well, after we were all done, and of course he didn't have the microphone, but he stood up anyway because he was that dominant personality. He said, yeah, I know, I appreciate what you're saying, Mark, and I understand the dominant task bulldozer stuff, but I just want you to know I'm good with people too. Exactly. So I have the microphone and I'm a coach, so I'm very comfortable with silence. So I just let it sit in the room for a bit. And then I said, you may be, and that's very special, but I would check with each of your team members first. And then we went on with the training. At the end of the training, every single person on his team that was there came up to me individually and said, thank you so much. He stinks with people. He's so bad. So that's where I think part of leadership and whether you're an emerging leader, established leader, someone who's trying to bring up other leaders, leadership is influence. It doesn't have to be a positional thing. If it's trying to get someone else, your kids to do their homework or something, it's leadership, is to always be in a learning state of some sort. And just assuming that I don't have it all figured out. And so with a D, what I love is looking for someone who's opposite us, the more people-centered, reserved people, and having an ally in the room that you can say afterwards, is there anyone I ticked off unintentionally? Because as a D, you don't mind ticking people off. That's fine. That's just life. But if there are people, the S's will know there are people that are more intuitively harmonized. Nines may be that way on the Enneagram. They kind of know where people are at and just emotionally. And so they may be able to figure out where the conflict is that you didn't see. And that way you
Oh,
can
no,
go
no,
with
no! I see it. I know I pissed them off, but they were in the way of where I wanted to go.
Oh, no. There's people that I don't mind pissing off at all. Yeah. I resonate with a lot of D. There are some people that just, it's okay. It's fine. Conflict is not something to be avoided in my world. It's just, let's get through it faster. But you can also learn some people skills too. So you can pull them when you need to, but you don't have to pull them all the time.
Yeah, I'd like to. So you started. You already mentioned the Enneagram. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because it's a very interesting concept that seems to be been
So
around
the
for a
Enneagram
while.
seems
And
to be, oh, sorry. The Enneagram seems to be an ancient wisdom tradition. We don't really know exactly where it came from, but the Homer's Odyssey, his journey home goes through the same 9 types in the same order as they're shown on this really complex diagram, 9 through 1. The Dante's Inferno has these levels all represented as well. Basically what it is the Enneagram posits that there are 9 types of stories that people tell themselves to protect themselves in the world. Yet early in life, at a very young age, we realize, oh, this place isn't safe. This world thing isn't safe, and we need to build up an armor. And so there are 9 different ways of orienting to the world that we build up. And why I like the Enneagram is that it's a growth-minded thing, whereas DISC or Highlands or other things can be labeling and confining. They can be just restrictive. It could be just, I'm just D. I'm just the way I am. Deal with it. Where the Enneagram has baked into it these arrows and dynamism that says, in stress you tend to go this way, or a weakness is you tend to move toward this number. In health, your growth path is to do it this way. So the 9 types are. They can be boiled down into head-centered, heart-centered, and gut-centered people. There's 3 different ways of processing the world. A lot of just different systems have head, heart, and gut. And so that also fits very well with the Enneagram formula or typology. I could geek out about this, and I want to stop there and see if there are more questions.
No, it's a great sort of how do you we'll call it, a model or whatever. Apart from you have that, you have 16 personalities and all sorts of other ones, and so this one I wasn't aware of.
Okay,
Uh,
so one of the reasons why I like this for leaders
mm,
is that if you're looking behaviorally at DIS and C, you could have some go-getter people that are take no prisoners, just rushing forward. The Enneagram opens it up some more and allows you to see you may address them one way, but you're not getting the results with that person that you want to, even though they seem to be having the behaviors that would indicate they would be responding well to what you're saying. With the Enneagram, you could have an aggressive type, but you could have three different stories or three different ways of orienting to the world. There are 3, 7, and 8 are all considered aggressive stances. Threes want to look successful. They want the crowd to see them as successful, and that's how they orient to the world. Sevens don't care about that. Sevens will, I just messed up yesterday. I messed up last, you should have seen the mess up I just made. Look at my dumbass award trophy. That would be a 7. Failure isn't a problem at all. Whereas for a 3, it would be a moral failing. For a 7, the fast pacedness is to avoid anything that seems boring or mundane. And for an 8, that fast paced, take no prisoners charge is because they don't want to be bullied. They want to protect the people around them. They want to protect the domain, their space. So if you see this kind of go getter, goal setting person, and your one way of speaking to them isn't working, the Enneagram opens up a few other ways to figure out, oh, maybe I'm reading them wrong. It's not that you're going to tell them what number they are. That's not the point, because it's an internal story. You don't know what their internal talk is. But if this will be successful isn't working, maybe success isn't their driver. Maybe it's something else. And so then it gives you some tools to be able to experiment with what might be more effective.
So taking a slightly different spin on that, I worked a fair bit in group dynamics.
Okay.
And I know in a group what my primary persona is, which is to look for and identify risk and what about and have we thought about. But if there's somebody else who's already got that position and I know it's covered, I suddenly am the biggest cheerleader in the room because I know somebody's going to keep me grounded. So now I'm gonna energize. And so those things are not
That's
fixed.
awesome.
They're very, very pliable, and I watched it kind of in myself. But we always have more questions than we have time, and we've had a really great time. I've loved the conversation, lots of great stories and great laughs and great insights. You talk about the 4 quadrants of leadership and the journey, and your book is focused on helping people kind of get unstuck from this, swing this pendulum between 1 and 2 and move up to 3. Tell our listeners about the 4 quadrants as maybe a short summary for our last question.
I like that you clarified a short summary instead of the keynote.
Just leading ever so slightly.
Thanks for setting the parameters. That's great. The 4 quadrants are sort of where I've seen the people I work with go through growth, and I call it leadership because that's my specialty is leadership coaching. But other people have looked at this and say, this is how I learned whatever thing I'm doing now. So quadrant 1 is you follow you follow what you've seen other people do. That's the observe quadrant. Somebody puts you in leadership and you just lead like you've seen other people lead. That doesn't always work. And some of those motivational speakers that I listened to growing up would say, if you're leading and you turn around and there's no one behind you, you're just out for a walk. And that hits your confidence. So you drop in confidence and you shift into quadrant 2, where there's something broken with me. I need it fixed. And I call this the experiment quadrant. And most people seem to bounce around this quadrant, lurching from fixed to fixed, certification, webinar, conference, degree, book, and having a lot of successes, but never feeling it, never allowing themselves to feel the success because they always are looking only at what's broken in them or what's not working.
Is that partly imposter syndrome or something
Absolutely.
similar?
Yeah. It's that sort of in the old movie Wizard of Oz that, don't look behind them. Don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Like I'm going to be found out. In fact, I was listening to Shankar Vedantam, a Hidden Brain podcast, and Tom Hanks has that. And Maya Angelou had this too, of this, they're going to find out that I'm really not all this, that I don't have it all figured out. So it's a very common human tendency, but it's one of those so common that nobody talks about it. So we think everybody else has it figured out because they're not leading with I don't know what I'm doing either. I remember calling my dad up at 45 and saying, Dad, You were just making this thing up as you went along, weren't you? This fatherhood thing. Because I realized at
Obviously.
45, I thought he had it figured out.
Yeah.
Like I had this clear mind of he knows he's got life figured out. He started laughing too. So where that doubt is, it's the invitation, the surprising gift of doubt is that it could be there's something broken with you, but doubt is kind of nudging you to the internal cues. What's your intuition saying? What's the stuff that we're told not to pay attention to because it's soft, it's emotional, it's don't just pay attention to the data. So instead of saying what's wrong with me, why am I so broken, I believe doubt can get you to say, what if I'm exactly the right person for this situation? What if my organization is exactly the voice this sector needs? Why is that? And that's where you start looking at your hardwiring, your values, your stories, your goal setting, and you begin to put together for yourself, just like you said, Troy, about you reflected, you noticed this about yourself. You noticed your habitual patterns, and you just separate yourself from your habits a little bit internally. And I wonder why I'm doing that again. Or I'm in this group and I notice, oh, the risk taking is taken care of. So that allows me to relax and be the cheerleader. And that in turn grows your confidence because you now know why you're doing things and you know the things you're good at. And when you come into a situation where you know you're not going to be good at, you know who to follow or where to learn so that you can get back into that focused step of quadrant 4. So quadrant 3 is analyze and quadrant 4 is focus. But the magic happens in quadrant 3.
Yeah. It's amazing, like all of that. And you start talking about that, and we can talk another hour about then the opposite of that, which is going into the Dunning-Kruger effect and all of that, and how to crack those kind of things for change. But we're unfortunately out of time. This has been absolutely blessed to talk to you, Mark. So I can only say thank you so much for your insights and for your stories and spending time with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. This has been a blast.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.